Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Next Gen Leaders Debate. I'm Lenore Swiston, host of CFCR Civically Speaking, and I will be one of your moderators for this evening. As young people make up the largest voting bloc in the upcoming election in 1 week's time, the student unions of the University of Saskatchewan and Regina have partnered up with nonpartisan, nonprofit Future Majority to ensure that the issues that uniquely impact young people are being addressed. I will pass the mic on to my fellow moderator in a bit here, but I want to begin this debate with a treaty acknowledgement. Whether it's our Saskatoon attendees in Treaty 6 or Regina Fellows in Treaty 4, or for those from smaller communities from across our province, treaty-wise, we wish to acknowledge all of the treaties made with Indigenous peoples of this land, as well as the homeland of the Métis and the Dakota as well. I want to recognize that. Tonight, we recognize that voting in elections brings complexities and tensions to Indigenous youth. Our aim is that through engaging young people in Canadian politics, we can make them more aware of their place as settlers in the colonial system, and we can work to use our power as the future majority to force politicians to work towards reconciliation by moving away from worlds and toward policies which establish and respect Indigenous sovereignty. I will pass the mic on to my other moderator in a second here, but I just want to give a shout out to Future Majority, to the University of Saskatchewan, and to the University of Regina, and to everybody that has put together this awesome ability for youth to have, young people to have a voice. Thank you so much. And you can tell I'm nervous, so I hope that the people that we are here to have the main show, they're as nervous as I am, because there's lots of stakes here, and we're excited to kick this off. So now I toss it over to my fellow moderator, Anika.
Perfect. Thanks, Lenore. My name is Anika Maisha, host of The Voice of Saskatoon, and I'll be your other moderator for this evening. Now for the ground rules. First, I would like to highlight that respect is expected in this debate, both from the politicians and those in attendance. Any hateful remarks in the chat denouncing someone's race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, and you will get the boot. This is a nonpartisan event for all of us to hear and share different views, so let's be considerate to all. With that in mind, please use the chat. I see a lot of people are using that, so keep that coming. The structure of the debate will begin with 90-second opening remark and will then proceed to questions on 4 areas that are impacting young people in Saskatchewan: healthcare, Indigenous affairs, affordability, jobs, and the future. After that, we will have 10 minutes for questions from our community partners. A note to our politicians: we'll let you know how long you have to answer, and Mother Jo, our timekeeper, will be sharing a visual on the amount of time you have left. We have a lot to cover this evening, so if you go over the time limit, we will mute you. Finally, because before we jump in, you should know that we're also live streaming this event on Facebook. A link has just been dropped in the chat to the live stream. Share it yourself so other people you know can tune in as well. Okay, who's ready to get this debate started? I know I am. Perfect. So great. For the first time in our lifetime, young people make up the largest voting group in the upcoming elections. These generation of Saskatchewanans have been uniquely impacted by the COVID-19 and are facing an uncertain future. And now there is some time for opening remarks from our politicians. So I will start with Dr. Meili. You have 90 seconds for your opening remark.
Okay, well, thank you, Annika and Lenore. Thanks to the URSU and USSU for organizing this and Future Majority. And I want to thank Mr. Duncan for joining us tonight. It's disappointing that Mr. Moe chose not to be here. In an election as crucial as this, I do think that the people who want to be your premier should be willing to talk to the young people of Saskatchewan, because this election, it's about you, and it's about all of us, and about the choice we have about the kind of future we want in this province. And it's a choice that is so clear. Between the Sask Party's plan for more cuts and privatization, slow down our economy and hurt people, and the New Democrat plan to invest in people, get our economy moving, help each other out in this difficult time. Because we know that even before the pandemic, people in Saskatchewan were feeling stretched and stressed. Think about a young woman who I met with the other day, Morgan, film student in Regina, worried about what she's going to do after her studies, as the film industry has been deeply damaged here and unable to make ends meet because she's making the lowest minimum wage in the entire country. We shouldn't have to settle for this. We can do so much better. Instead of sending jobs away, we can create jobs right here in Saskatchewan and make sure people get paid a decent wage instead of always seeing higher education more expensive and harder to access. We can invest in that right here. This is a crucial moment, and the decisions that you make right now will have a huge impact on our future. This is our chance to put people first.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Meili. I will now go to Minister Duncan to give your opening remarks. You'll have 90 seconds.
Thanks, Anika. Thanks, Lenore. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. Dr. Meili, great to be with you again. And I can say that, and I'm sure Dr. Meili would agree with me, that mute button would come in very handy in the legislature. We'll have to incorporate that somehow in the future. I want to thank Future Majority for hosting us this evening. I think it's so great. It's heartening to see so many young people that are engaged in the election and want to be engaged in the election and the issues that face our province and your lives. And so it reminds me a lot about my interests when I was your age. So I've campaigned. I worked on my first campaign in high school, the 1997 election. And I was a candidate for the first time in 2006 in a by-election when I was first elected to the legislature. And I was only 26 years old at the time. So don't let anybody tell you that age is a barrier to getting involved in politics, whether that be on the elected side or the non-elected side. I want to encourage everybody to continue to do what you're doing. I will just say very quickly, as I see our time is going fast, we certainly believe as a Saskatchewan party that this election is really about the economy and recovering the economy in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all facing. We want to ensure that we have a strong economy so that we can continue to grow jobs. We've seen 75,500 jobs added in this province in the last 13 years, and we want to see jobs continue to grow so that we have a strong population.
Thank you for your remarks, Minister Duncan, and thanks to both of you for keeping time. This is great. We're off to a wonderful start. We're now going to jump into our first issue for this section of the debate around healthcare. And so in this opening question in healthcare, I want to go to saying this pandemic has significantly impacted the mental health of young people across the province. What would you do to support the mental health of the people of Saskatchewan? You'll each have a minute and a half each, and I'll let Dr. Meili answer this question first.
Thank you very much. As a family doctor working all over Saskatchewan and particularly in inner city Saskatoon, one of the things that frustrated me most was people would come to see me and say they wanted help with depression, with anxiety, or maybe they were struggling with addictions and were ready to make a change, get off of alcohol and drugs. And we would say, we're so glad you came to see us. We want to help. And now you can wait 3 months, 6 months, 18 months before you actually see a psychiatrist or can get into detox or get into any rehabilitation. And that's just wrong. The message that we're sending people when you say that is that they're not worth it. We're not willing to make the investments to help people out. And right now is a time for us to invest. We know what the pandemic has shown us about the needs in mental health. We know about the rise in overdose deaths and people struggling with addictions. Now is the time to invest in the full spectrum of addictions and mental health care. So prevention, making sure people have hope, that they have a job, that they have a good education, that they feel they've got a chance in life. Early identification, so anyone who is struggling can get access to primary care, get counseling, and when people are ready for care, that they're able to get into longer term supports so that they can get the treatment. And a big part of that is our commitment to dedicated mental health and addictions emergency rooms so that nobody gets turned away when they come looking for help.
Yeah, thank you for your response, Dr. Meili. And now I will ask Minister Duncan, you now have 90 seconds to answer the question.
Well, in this budget, in the 2020-21 budget, we did add 4.6% onto the health budget. Might not sound like a big number, but that's actually $250 million, $250 million. So Part of that investment is adding about 28 additional detox beds around the province. Just down the highway from where I'm at, I'm in Weyburn right now, just down the highway in Estevan, we're building new specialized crystal meth beds in that community to help people dealing with that addiction. We're adding addictions workers in emergency rooms in Regina, Saskatoon, Prince Albert. We're adding additional supports in our schools. We're adding additional residential supports for people that are in hospital, dealing with a mental health issue, that need to transition out of hospital, but not directly back home. So we're adding dollars to build new residential supports for people to help with that transition, as well as adding additional dollars into suicide prevention measures. I know that that's obviously has been a topic that's top of mind for a lot of people in this province, not just this year, but in the last number of years. And additional dollars have been invested in child and youth intensive mental health support. So this has been a big top of mind for the Ministry of Health for a number of years, and this investment in this budget is certainly going to go a long ways.
Thank you. I will now open up the floor to both of you as participants, starting with you, Dr. Meili. You have up to 2 minutes to respond to Minister Duncan on the topic of healthcare.
Well, you know, we were in the legislature together not that long ago, Mr. Duncan, and we had a vote, and it was a vote on a suicide prevention strategy bill put forward by Doyle Vermette. Doyle's the member for Cumberland, and you were there. You listened to his speech, and it was a pretty moving speech. He talked about the funerals he's had to attend, the families he's had to counsel and console. And it was really disappointing to see the MLAs on the other side listen attentively to Mr. Vermette's speech, but then turn around and vote entirely against it. And I guess, why not just jump into this? Why do you think that was the right thing to do? Why did you choose to listen to that speech, hear what Doyle had to say, and then vote against such a practical measure as a legislated suicide prevention strategy?
Sure. So, I mean, I certainly don't question at all Mr. Vermette or anybody else's sincerity on the topic. Certainly, he's very passionate, as are many people across the province on the issue. Just by a way of show of hands of people that are on my screen, has anybody read Bill 618, the Suicide Prevention Act, the bill that Mr. Vermette introduced in the legislature? Has anybody read the bill? Okay, so just really quickly, Section 2.1 of the bill calls on the Saskatchewan Health Authority to establish a provincial strategy for suicide prevention. So the bill itself was not a suicide prevention strategy. It called on the government to do so. And the government, whether Mr. Meili agrees with what the strategy says or not, we have pillars of life. That is the suicide prevention strategy in the province. So when it came time to a vote, what Mr. Vermette was asking for had already been presented by the government. So it's not that certainly I'll speak for myself because I did vote against the bill. It wasn't that I didn't support the intent of the bill or what Mr. Vermette was calling for. What he was calling for was actually produced by the government of Saskatchewan. So it negated the reason for the bill.
Yeah, that's simply not the case. A legislated suicide prevention strategy is something much different than the pillars of life, which has been described by the experts as so empty and vague as to be meaningless, unable to save lives. When we look at good suicide prevention strategies built around the world, great examples here in Canada, in Quebec, and in Nunavut, that legislation and the key elements that were outlined in that legislation are missing in pillars of life and are essential. And you know, we saw a further step to this story, of course, with the visit of Tristan DeRocher, who walked all the way from La Ronge to Regina, almost 700 kilometers, and then spent 44 days fasting outside the legislature, his teepee surrounded by photos of people we've lost in Saskatchewan, the province that leads the nation in the rates of suicide. 44 days, one for each of the Sask Party members that voted against Mr. Vermette's bill. And he asked to meet with the Premier. And the Premier's not here tonight. I guess I'll ask you, had you been in his position, would you have gone and met with Tristan Durocher?
Oh, I can't answer hypothetical. I'm not the Premier of Saskatchewan, but I will say this. I was the health minister for 4.5 years, and I can think of, for myself, one occasion where I did not meet with somebody that came to the legislature. I made a practice of meeting with people that came to the legislature in the role as a minister. And certainly Mr. Durocher was met by 2 ministers of the Crown, who that's their responsibility, that's their file. So, I'm not going to, again, answer a hypothetical, but I would just, again, say that, whether it's the Mental Health Commission of Canada that has spoken highly of the Pillars of Life action plan, that the strategy that's been put in place by the government of Saskatchewan, or the fact that both the federal government and the FSIN have both signed agreements with the provincial government to work towards actioning the strategy Pillars of Life. So again, we can have a debate about whether it's the merits of the strategy itself, and I think that there are very strong merits within the strategy. That's different from, I think, both of the issues that you've raised, the vote in the legislature or Mr. Durocher coming to Regina.
Well, I do think that message sent to Mr. Durocher, the ministers that were sent across to just say, please go away, and that Pillars of Life is good enough. That really sent that along with the vote, really did send the wrong message to the families who are struggling, families like the ones that Mr. Vermette represents. We know Northern Saskatchewan, very high rates of suicide. First Nations and Métis girls in Saskatchewan, 29 times more likely to lose their life by suicide than other young people in the province. But there's another story that comes to mind, and that's the story of Sam Alugo. Sam Alugo is a U of R student. Maybe some of the folks on the call know him. And we lost Sam Alugo as well, as he was turned away not once but twice when he sought help. He was seeking help at a time when he was feeling desperate and hopeless. And this is one of the things that I really want to highlight the commitment to, and that's the dedicated mental health and addictions emergency rooms. Right now, folks struggling with mental health and addictions challenges are mixed in with the broken legs and heart attacks. It's hard for them to get the dedicated care. We need to take pressure off of our emergency rooms and at the same time help people struggling get the exact right kind of support.
Well, I'll just very quickly say that this is certainly a priority for the government of Saskatchewan, and we don't need to wait until new emergency rooms are built. That's why we're already investing in this budget $800,000 to add additional mental health and addictions workers right into existing emergency rooms so that we can provide that support.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. The time is up. So moving on, thanks for the answers. And our next question focuses on rural healthcare. The leaders of both parties were in Prince Albert this weekend to discuss their platforms on ensuring the rural people of Saskatchewan's healthcare needs are met. Why does each party see as the biggest barrier to young, rural people accessing proper healthcare, and what is your plans to fix this problem? I will let Minister Duncan respond to this question first. Minister, you have 90 seconds to answer.
Thanks for the question. Well, I think first and foremost, we need the right healthcare professionals working in facilities across rural Saskatchewan. I represent rural Saskatchewan. This is very close to my heart. Certainly, this is an area that we focused on by ensuring that we have physicians and nurses and other healthcare providers all across the province, including rural Saskatchewan. We've added 900 doctors since 2007. We've added nearly 4,000 nurses of all designations in that same amount of time, and have built a number of new facilities and are working towards a new significant expansion, for example, in Prince Albert and right here in Weyburn as well. So we need to continue to recruit and retain. When we formed government, there were only 60 training seats at the College of Medicine and 60 residency positions. We've increased that to 100 seats and 120 residency positions. We've also ensured that we have a made in Saskatchewan assessment for foreign trained doctors. I think we're always going to rely on internationally trained physicians in Saskatchewan, but in the past we used to rely on Manitoba to do the assessments for us. That's no longer the case. We have our own assessment here. So we're going to continue to invest in healthcare infrastructure. I've mentioned a couple of projects already, and ensure that we have the proper complement of professionals.
Thank you for that response, Minister Duncan. Now, Dr. Meili, you now have 90 seconds to answer the question.
Thanks, Annika. In my early days as a family physician, worked as what's called a locum, which means you're kind of a substitute doctor. I traveled all over rural Saskatchewan. I think I worked in nearly 30 different communities, and saw that there are still serious challenges for people accessing care, and it can be really difficult for people to get appropriate access to a specialist, to emergency care. Recall some pretty hairy nights riding ambulances into town trying to support people and make sure they made it home alive. One of the recent disappointments for me was to see the government decide to shut down 12 emergency rooms in the middle of a pandemic. 3 of those are still not open. And this is something I think is taking us in the wrong direction. We've seen a reduction in rural health services over the last few years, and it's really important. In all those communities that I worked in, never once did I think, these folks have too much access to healthcare. Do we have any access? In fact, it's been a challenge for a long time, and it's only getting worse. That's why I want to work with rural communities, commit to reopening every one of those closed emergency rooms, and make a clear commitment to keeping our emergency rooms open, keeping all of our acute care services open that are currently there. And one of my other roles as a family doctor was working with the College of Medicine on training the next generation of docs. And this is a key piece to me. The best way to get doctors who will go to rural Saskatchewan and stay in rural Saskatchewan is to recruit young people into the profession from rural areas. Have them do more of their training there. They're far more likely to go and to stay in communities they can then continue to serve.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Meili. I will now open the floor for both participants to respond to one another, starting with Minister Duncan. You now have 2 minutes to respond to Dr. Meili.
Well, we've increased the number of communities across rural Saskatchewan that actually can play host to resident doctors. So that's one thing that allows for physicians to get an idea of what practice in rural Saskatchewan is like and would be like for them as a possible career choice. I would just say on the 12 long-term care facilities, and Dr. Meili,
Emergency.
Sorry?
It was emergency rooms.
Oh yeah, sorry, the emergency rooms. So, a combination of, yes, we're always trying to recruit and retain, but one of those was in my constituency. And keep in mind, this was at the beginning of a pandemic, and I think all 12 of those facilities, the long-term care facility is attached to the hospital with the emergency room. And what was everybody trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid what happened in New York City and other places where long-term care residents face the brunt of COVID-19. So I think the Saskatchewan Health Authority really was doing so to try to reduce the risk as much as possible during a global pandemic for our most vulnerable patients, that being the residents in long-term care facilities. I guess I would just say that we've come a long way in this province. 900 physicians have certainly greatly reduced.
Duncan, the time is up. I will now move on to Dr. Meili. You have your 2 minutes.
Great, thanks very much. We saw that decision to close down rural emergency rooms and the way that increased challenges. I was talking to a nurse just a few days ago in Swift Current who works in Herbert in one of the long-term care facilities that's associated with the emergency room there. And she talked of the frustration of having residents of long-term care having to go, instead of down the hall and get care right away in Herbert, she actually had to send them into Swift Current by ambulance. Serious questions about the ongoing commitment, because that community still doesn't have its emergency room reopened again, despite the government having committed to reopening them all. When it comes to recruitment and retention, we actually saw this government cut $500,000 out of recruitment and retention funding for doctors and nurses. And this is where my concern really lies the most. We know that wait times have gone much, much higher in recent years. Since 2015, we've seen a big climb in wait times for surgery, wait times for imaging, and in our emergency rooms. You know, we hear so many cases of people waiting days on end in hallways, waiting to be admitted after waiting to get up into a bed after having been admitted. And the road ahead that concerns me the most is the word austerity. That's what we've heard from the former finance minister. What we've heard from this government is that the plan is one of cuts, of privatization. And that's a bad idea anytime. The cuts we've seen to healthcare, to education in recent years weren't wise choices then. But to make cuts in the middle of a pandemic, well, that to me is just a dangerous idea and absolutely the worst road if we're going to try to be providing good healthcare in rural Saskatchewan.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Meili. That wraps up our section on healthcare. We will now be moving on to our second section of the debate, which will be focusing on Indigenous affairs. To lead and moderate this section of the debate, I would like to introduce Regan Ratmasponis, former USSU president and Indigenous leader in the Pine House community. Thank you for joining us tonight, Regan, and I'll pass on the mic over to you.
Thank you, Anika. Regan Ratmasponis, Sikasun, Tansegakyo, Tansaniwakmaganak. Hello, all my relatives. I'm a member of the Lac La Ronge Indian Band, and I am currently right now in Pine House in northern Saskatchewan. I am Nihio, which means I am Cree, and I'm also a USask student in the Treaty 10 territory. My first question is on suicide prevention. Tristan Derosher walked from La Ronge to Regina in June to bring up the serious issue of suicide prevention. Suicide is a serious epidemic that Indigenous nations and communities have been faced with. But in order to aid the issue, it is important we address the root causes. If elected into government, how will your respective plans on the issue of suicide address intergenerational trauma and internalized oppression that may be factors that lead to suicide among Indigenous youth and people? And for that, I will call on Minister Duncan. You have 90 seconds.
Thanks for the question, Regan. Boy, 90 seconds isn't going to do justice to such a significant topic in our province. You know, I think first and foremost, it starts with hope, giving people of Saskatchewan, all people of Saskatchewan, hope that a better future awaits them. We want to ensure that we can do that through opportunities, economic opportunities, social opportunities. We also, I think, also have to, though, focus on where we can provide help when people need help. So I can say that, you know, in this year's provincial budget, $1.2 million was included for mental health capacity building within our schools, particularly in northern Saskatchewan. $1 million was added to add 12 child and youth positions in places like Stanley Mission and Pine House, where I think you're at. $750,000 for the Roots of Hope suicide prevention strategy that went into places like Meadow Lake, La Ronge, Buffalo Narrows. So, you know, I think that, you know, we want to be able to provide support for people when they need that support, but also provide for hope for their futures. And that's why we're really focusing on what's the best way that we can ensure that we have a strong economy so that people can take part in that economy, so that they can find a job here in Saskatchewan. So I think it's really trying to balance off those different priorities for the province.
Thank you, Minister Duncan. I'll now move to Dr. Ryan Meili with 90 seconds.
Okay, well, Tansi Regan, Moon, good to hear from you. You know, when I think about this question, you think about intergenerational trauma, the impact of residential schools. I think back to the folks that I worked with, in particular in inner city Saskatoon, and how many folks were struggling with mental health issues, with addictions issues that were directly related to that. And when we step back and we look at the statistics in Saskatchewan, 60% of kids on reserve living in poverty, double the rate of unemployment among Indigenous people as non-Indigenous people. We see that there still is a huge gap in what makes the biggest difference in the quality of people's lives. And my commitment is to work with you, with the young people of this province, with First Nations and Métis leaders to close that gap, those gaps. When it comes to health, employment, education, justice, we know that that costs First Nations and Métis people particularly. It also costs all of us. When we have more people struggling, it makes life more difficult and more expensive for everyone in the province. And I think there's some great models for us to draw on, but it starts with, one, being open and honest about the realities that reconciliation is going to be hard work, but it takes action and commitment, and two, seeing a government that actually wants to do the work.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meili. I will now give 2 minutes for you folks to debate and to have a conversation and a dialogue on this issue.
Great. Well, I want to just dig into that closing the gap a little bit more. There's a model out of Australia, and certainly Australia's relations with Indigenous people have not been perfect or exemplary, but they've taken a new approach that I think is really neat. Each year there's a report that comes out, the Closing the Gap report, which fully lays bare the reality of the statistics, honest about what's happening with poverty, with education disparities, etc. And then the Prime Minister gets up and gives a speech, the Closing the Gap speech, which is up there with a budget or throne speech, really raises this to the priority it should be. And as Premier, that's something I would do. Make it clear that reconciliation is a top issue, and that's exactly where we need to put the effort in. This is a government, unfortunately, that has ignored the North, has not taken reconciliation seriously, and it's time for a change. It's time for leadership that is actually willing to step up, admit the problems that are here, and be willing to do the work.
Well, I would just say, in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the recommendations, I believe 27 of the 34, we've already seen government produce action on recommendations. We've also, we've seen, for instance, graduation rates of Indigenous people in Saskatchewan, the highest rates that they've been in 20 years. Employment of Indigenous people in Saskatchewan is 30% higher than it was when this government took office. And we've put in place, I think, a number of programs that we want to build upon that. I was pleased to host forestry ministers, for example, here in Saskatchewan last year from across the country. And the forest management plans that we have in Saskatchewan, working with Indigenous companies, Indigenous people, is second to none. They're actually a showcase for.
With respect, Mr. Duncan, you're not so much speaking on the internalized oppression or intergenerational trauma. You're speaking more to the economic. Would you be able to answer on how your plan would address intergenerational trauma and internalized oppression?
Well, I think, I tried to address that at the beginning in terms of talking about, trying to ensure that we provide supports for people where they're at, but also providing for hope for their futures. I was just giving some examples of, I think, where we have seen success in Saskatchewan in trying to balance off both of those issues.
Perfect. Thank you very much, folks. My second question is in regards to Saskatchewan Indigenous community relations. Nova Scotia has recently made headlines for the handling of relations between Indigenous, the Mi'kmaq, and non-Indigenous fishermen over a resource that Indigenous peoples out east have lived off of since time immemorial. If elected, what will your government do to ensure treaties are respected here in the province of Saskatchewan and to ensure that issues like this are not taking place here in Saskatchewan? I will start off with Dr. Meili first for 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. It is very disturbing to see the conflict happening and the treatment of Mi'kmaq fishers right now. These treaties that we are a part of, this is, we hear the term, we are all treaty people, but the reality is the situation today where you have the vast majority of the people who are incarcerated or who are in foster care are Indigenous, when you have so much higher rates of suicide, of diabetes, of HIV among Indigenous people, where poverty, 60% of kids on reserve in poverty, a quarter of children in the province living in poverty. We're not living those treaties. We're not honoring them when those are the results. And this, to me, is what it's all about. It comes back to outcomes. But to get to those good outcomes, you need the relationship. And that was the piece that I left out when I talked about that closing the gap. It's not about the speech. It's not about the report. It's about the relationship. The relationship that is then formed with the province, instead of being what we often see. Provinces passing the buck, saying this is a federal issue or this is an on-reserve issue. A province that's going to be a facilitator and a leader in achieving this. Instead, we've seen the Sask Party disrespect trappers, disrespect traditional land users. We've seen a reluctance to engage on things like addressing the unequal funding of education on reserve. We need instead a government that recognizes that this is a top priority and will do the work.
Thank you, Dr. Meili. I'll now turn it over to Minister Duncan for 90-second response.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. So certainly building relationships and partnerships with Indigenous people is important to the future of our province, of our shared province. I would just say that under the Saskatchewan Party, treaty education actually became mandatory for our curriculum. Before that, it was really up to school divisions to incorporate it where they wanted to, and we wanted to ensure that it was actually mandated as a part of the provincial curriculum so that all Saskatchewan people can understand that they are in fact treaty people and what exactly does that mean. In terms of building partnerships, and I kind of spoke a little bit about in terms of the forest management agreements that we have, but we're doing other things. We have a first of its kind in North America when it comes to the First Nations Power Authority. An agreement and a set aside that we have that will ensure that Indigenous people and organizations owned by Indigenous people are actually equity partners when it comes to building the economy, building the future economy of Saskatchewan. So, we have a number of these types of relationships and partnerships that we are working towards, and I think that will be a benefit to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people going forward in the province.
So I will now hand things over to our moderator, Anika. I wanted to thank both Lenore and Anika for giving me this opportunity to moderate this specific piece of the debate, and I wish everyone a good evening. Take care.
Thanks, Regan.
Thanks, Regan. So our next question. Young people are continuing to feel squeezed out by the cost of living in the province. Saskatchewan having the highest rate of province emigration in the country. What will you do to address the problem with affordability in the province? I will let Dr. Meili respond to the question first. Dr. Meili, you have now 90 seconds.
Thanks very much. We've seen this as a growing problem, especially these last 3-4 years since Mr. Moe became Premier. Life has become harder. More people in Saskatchewan having to walk away from their mortgages than anywhere else in Canada. We saw a report just yesterday said that over half of the province, if they had to face an extra $200 in cost, wouldn't be able to do it. People are that close to being broke. And this wasn't because of the pandemic. It was this way before COVID-19. And I asked Mr. Moe about this not long ago in the legislature. And I asked him about the recession that was existing last year in 2019, lowest economic growth in the province. And he said it was news to him. Well, it sure isn't news to the folks across the province who are struggling to make ends meet. And one of the things that is really making it harder for people to make ends meet is having the lowest minimum wage in the entire country. We saw just a couple weeks ago now, the minimum wage went up by 13 cents here in Saskatchewan. Now, these are the folks on the front lines, grocery store workers, clerks, gas station attendants who stepped up. We saw how essential their work is during COVID-19, and yet they get a 13-cent raise, which is no thanks at all, when we should be really recognizing that these are people doing real work and they deserve to be paid a decent wage, not to be living in poverty while they're working full-time.
Thank you for your response, Dr. Meili. Minister Duncan, you now have 90 seconds to answer.
Well, in terms of affordability, obviously, this is a high priority for the government of Saskatchewan. As a part of our campaign commitment, what we've committed to is a 10% reduction in power rates for the next year, particularly in light of what we're dealing with COVID, trying to provide some assistance and a break, frankly, for people and businesses in Saskatchewan. What we've also done in Saskatchewan and worked very hard at this since 2007 is actually raised all of the basic exemptions for individuals and families so that the government's not taking dollars, particularly from low-income people. So in the past, when there was no predictability when it came to minimum wage, because our thresholds were so low, the government could increase the minimum wage, but then they would claw back a lot of that minimum wage increase anyways through taxes. A family of four making $50,000 in Saskatchewan actually pays $2,300 less in provincial income tax than they did in 2007. So we have among the highest thresholds in all of Canada, so that people are actually keeping more dollars in their own pockets at the end of the workday. We've also, for students, for example, we've put in place a number of programs that I think have been very popular and successful. The graduate retention program that allows for students to get their tuition back, $20,000 of their tuition back over a number of years. That's been one of the reasons why 75,500 jobs have been created since 2013, and the population's grown by 170,000 people.
Thanks, Minister Duncan. I will now open up the floor for both participants to respond to one another, starting with Dr. Meili. You now have 2 minutes to respond to Minister Duncan.
The simple fact is people in Saskatchewan are working full time and having to stop by the food bank on their way home just to be able to feed their families. The lowest minimum wage in the country is absolutely wrong. We are a wealthy province, and yet we have a government that is committed. They've locked in the formula so that we will always have minimum wage as a poverty wage. And we hear from so many young people who are working full-time, working hard, trying to make ends meet, that say that's just no way that they can make ends meet on $11.40 an hour. That's why we've committed. In our first term, we will bring in a $15 an hour minimum wage. And we will continue to make sure that people are able to earn decent wages for the work they do. We also know that under the Sask Party, life has gotten much less affordable. We've seen tuition rise and rise and rise, the highest tuition in Western Canada. We also have seen, we talk about a 10% reduction in Sask power rates for 1 year. Well, that's real nice, but 50% increase under you. We've seen those numbers climb and climb in terms of how much people are having to pay for those power bills to begin with. We see that we've got SGI accumulating an extra $1 billion. We've committed to returning that overpay. Your government has said that's not a good idea. You cut $25 million from universities, $54 million out of classrooms back in 2017. You've taken away from the key services, and at the same time seen life get much, much harder to afford. It's a simple question though, and I asked Mr. Moe this the other day in the debate, and I wonder maybe if Minister Duncan has a different answer, but why do you think that the workers of Saskatchewan, hardworking folks, are worth so much less than workers in Ontario, Alberta, New Brunswick? Folks aren't working any harder than Saskatchewan workers right here.
Thanks, Dr. Meili. Minister Duncan, you now have 2 minutes to respond.
First of all, I give a lot of credit to Dr. Meili. I think only Dr. Meili could characterize a $250 million increase in the health budget and $140 million increase in the education budget as a cut. There have been no cuts. Health and education budgets have gone up this past year. I would just say, in the past, under the NDP governments, there was no predictability. There was no certainty when it came to minimum wage increases. It was basically when the government chose to do it. What we made a commitment to and what we followed through on is having a predictable formula that's tied to inflation. We can have a debate about whether or not the base needs to change to reflect the fact that time has gone on, but we certainly put in place a predictable formula that businesses and minimum wage earners could count on, something that wasn't provided under the NDP. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to imagine, but I can tell you because it's the truth. Under a self-described socialist government, the NDP, over 100,000 people paid provincial income taxes that were low-income earners. It was actually a Saskatchewan party government that took those low-income wage earners right off the income tax rolls by raising the basic personal exemption and the other exemptions that a family can have. So that family of four making $50,000 today in Saskatchewan, they would have paid $2,300 more 13 years ago under an NDP government.
Well, you know, I'm not sure that the idea of a predictable and certain poverty wage is quite the argument that you think it is, Minister Duncan, because that's what's locked in under this minimum wage. And the numbers of removal from the tax rolls, your party's never been able or willing to actually try to show any evidence there. It's really hard to believe when you won't be willing to show us the numbers. But there are some really important things that need to be corrected in what you had to say there. No cuts from education. 2017, $54 million were pulled out of our classrooms. We are still hundreds of dollars fewer per student than we were back in 2016. And this is where I think folks who are watching this election closely and thinking about the choice in front of us really need to concentrate. Because back in 2016, this government said no cuts, said no sell-offs of crowns. They got rid of STC. Minister Duncan worked hard to try to sell off SaskTel and SGI, and there were deep cuts to healthcare and education. And if this government gets a chance to go again, exactly what we'll see next.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meili. On to the next question. So next question is focusing on the cost of post-secondary education. Across the province, the average tuition cost per year is $7,136. During this pandemic, more students than ever before are learning online, yet they're still paying the same amount as they would for in-person learning. On top of that, some additional costs associated with technology have left students paying more for school than ever before. Dr. Meili, if elected, what would the New Democrats do to assist in the pandemic costs of post-secondary education? You now have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. This has been a very disappointing trend in recent years. We saw $25 million pulled out of universities back in 2017 and 0% increases since that time. That means when you don't have any increases, that's a cut as well. We know that costs increase for universities and they are forced to pass those on to students with tuition increases. And one of the things that frustrates me the most about that is the Sask Party is a party that talks about the economy. And yet the economics of starving your post-secondary educational institutions are just terrible. The best way to diversify and grow your economy is to invest in the next generation and in the research and development that happens on our campuses. That's why we will invest in universities. And one of the things that we'll do right away, because we know that people need some relief right now, is we're going to remove interest charges from student loans. This is something we heard from URSU and USSU advocates over recent years, that this is something that would help reduce costs. You know, this is a very simple change that can be made, one that makes a lot of sense. We don't need to be gathering interest from the loans that we're putting in place to make sure that people can afford an education. We'll remove that, help education be more affordable, and continue to invest in the post-secondary sector.
Thanks, Dr. Meili. Mr. Duncan, in the last week's debate, Premier Moe mentioned that he plans to raise the Saskatchewan's Advantage Scholarship from $500 per year to $750 per year for lower and middle income students. Please tell us more about the plan and how the government would assist with the pandemic cost of post-secondary education or for more students.
Sure, thanks for the question. So since 2012, about 48,000 students have taken advantage of the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship. That's $500 per year to eligible grade 12 students that are attending post-secondary education. We've made a commitment that we'll increase that by 50% to $750 per year. That's available going forward and continues to be available. We also have an Innovation and Opportunity Scholarship. 30,600 students have taken advantage of that. That's averages about $2,000 per student that receives that. As I've said before, we have the graduate retention program. It's the only one of its kind in Canada. That's the $20,000 of your tuition you receive back if you stay or come and stay in Saskatchewan or are employed in Saskatchewan. 74,000 graduates have taken advantage of that. And we continue to invest in our post-secondary education in our universities. 57% increase in the U of S funding since 2007. The College of Medicine alone, 185% increase since 2007. U of R, 42%. Our regional colleges, nearly 50%. I got my start at a regional college here in Weyburn at the Southeast College, did my entire first year there. Sask Poly's received increases as well. So we will continue to invest in our post-secondary as well as directly in our students.
Thanks, Mr. Duncan. I will now open up the floor for both participants to respond to one another, starting with Dr. Meili. You now have 2 minutes.
So back in 2017, and I'll make it clear why I keep referring to that because it's really important. But back in 2017, that scholarship was cut from a universal scholarship to something means tested. The tuition credit for books was removed, and the SAGES program, which is a sort of education savings plan, no longer applied in Saskatchewan. That on top of a $25 million cut from our universities and colleges that put them in an extremely difficult situation. That was back in 2017. Adding this $250 back, it's very nice, but it's sort of like stealing $10 and giving one back and expecting people to say thank you. And when it comes to that question of 2017, why do I keep coming back to that? Because in 2017, this government had a $1 billion deficit and they panicked. They doubled the PST, they tried to sell off Saskatchewan SGI, they killed STC, and they did all these cuts, including those deep cuts to post-secondary. We're now just in an election at a time where we've got a deficit of much, much more. And we know that the word austerity has been the path of this government and their plan for the road ahead. So when I think of what I've seen from this government and what they've shown us in the past, and where they're likely to go when it comes to post-secondary, makes me very, very worried. Because this is not a sector that they value. It's a sector that they have repeatedly cut. And I am very concerned about what we will see if Mr. Moe and Mr. Duncan are reelected, about further cuts and further damage to our post-secondary institution. They've shown us who they are. We should believe them.
Thanks, Dr. Meili. And now, Minister Duncan, you now have 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah, I guess, again, I would just say if you look at health, education, advanced education, the provincial budget of Saskatchewan has never included more spending than it does this year. And that's almost year over year has been the case. And certainly 2017, everybody acknowledges that that was, we made some difficult decisions. But in terms of austerity, Mr. Meili, you're presenting a plan that calls for between 3 and 4 times the amount of spending that our platform does, and that doesn't include the other $4 billion. So if we're going to be bringing through austerity, how would you explain what you're going to be doing at spending rates that are nearly 8 times, probably closer to 8 times when you include the $4 billion, more than us? So I don't think that really actually matches
I really
up.
welcome the question. It's a really important question. What we've committed to is to make the investments where they count the most. Bringing in affordable childcare, $25 a day childcare, increasing the spaces by 8,800 in our first term. We've committed to bringing in the best home care in Canada so that seniors can stay at home longer with that childcare and home care, supporting families to be able to get back to work. We've committed to hundreds more healthcare professionals, hundreds more teachers, and to investments in post-secondary, because we know that austerity, cutting right now, will slow down our economy, and it'll actually make it much harder to reach budget balance, because we'll have choked off the economy instead of lifting it up by supporting people, which is what we should be doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meili. We've now, guess what, guys? We're coming to the last section. So we've just finished the section on affordability, and now we're into the last section that kind of dovetails on this really well, and it's jobs and the future. So in this opening question, as previously mentioned, young people are finding it difficult to afford to stay in the province. With the lowest minimum wage in the country at $11.45 an hour, young people are going elsewhere to start their careers. At the same time, the data from Vote Compass survey for this election found that the top issue this election for people under 35 was the environment. How would your party work to create green jobs to support these concerns? First, we will let the Minister of Environment respond. Minister, you have 90 seconds.
Thanks, Lenore, for the question. First, let me just say, in terms of the importance for the economy and keeping young people in Saskatchewan, I think we've been successful at that. 170,000 people increase in population in the last 13 years. And I'll say this, when I was the age of most of you on this call, there was a cabinet minister, an NDP cabinet minister, that said, when people leave Saskatchewan, don't worry, because there's more for the rest of us. And I can guarantee you will never hear that from a Saskatchewan Party cabinet minister, MLA, candidate, period. We think that this province is better when there's more of us, not fewer of us. In terms of a green economy, we're already working our way towards ensuring that we can provide the jobs of today and as well tomorrow. So, for example, we are on a path to already increase wind generation by 4 times what it was when the government changed in 2007. We have the first 2 utility scale solar plants being built in Saskatchewan. We are pioneering geothermal with the first, what will be the first utility scale geothermal power plant in Saskatchewan. We have a partnership with Ontario and New Brunswick looking at small modular reactor technology. We're also seeing advances and first of its kind when it comes to a rare earth element processing plant being built in Saskatchewan, hydrogen project being built in Saskatchewan, lithium being extracted. This is a really exciting opportunity to be in Saskatchewan.
Thank you so much. And thanks for keeping the time, guys. You guys are doing great. So now I will hand it to Dr. Meili for your response to this question.
Great. Well, I do want to just address that question of keeping people here. And I think it's really important too. We should make sure that young people here have opportunities. That's why it's been so frustrating to see over the last few years that every major project, the bypass around Regina, the hospital in North Battleford, the power plant in Swift Current, those have gone to companies from France, from England, from Missouri or North Carolina, anywhere but Saskatchewan. I just don't think that's right. I think when we're building our projects, our hospitals, our roads, our schools, we build them with our dollars. Why wouldn't we have our workers on the job? And especially, that makes it harder for young people who are apprentices, who are trying to become journey people and get their tickets. We should make sure that they have the opportunities to do that work and get that training here. When it comes to the green economy and the opportunities there, we're far behind, and we should be in the lead. We have the best opportunity in the country to make energy from solar, from wind. We had Minister Duncan. He killed off the net metering program, got rid of the best opportunity we've seen for solar, and we saw hundreds and hundreds of people lose their jobs. We'll go the opposite direction. We'll invest through our Renew Saskatchewan program, make sure that every family, every business, every reserve that wants to get into solar, into conservation, can do so, lower their bills, and put thousands of people to work.
Thank you for your response, Dr. Meili. I'm now going to open it up to both of you on the floor to respond to each other, starting with Minister Duncan. You now have 2 minutes to respond.
Yeah, just first of all, I think Dr. Meili knows that the vast majority of people that were employed on those major projects that he mentioned were Saskatchewan-based people. In terms of companies that actually bid on a project like the Swift Current Chinook power plant, we don't build 350 megawatt gas plants every day in this province. Most of the workers, a large number of businesses that were working on those are Saskatchewan-based. But in terms of Canadian companies that would actually bid on a project to be like that, to build that project, really there would be probably one bidder, and that would be SNC-Lavalin. And so I'm not sure that Dr. Meili would agree with SaskPower sole sourcing a contract to SNC-Lavalin. We see how that's worked out for some other people in this country. In terms of the net metering project, I still don't understand, Dr. Meili. We have a net metering program in Saskatchewan. Obviously, we've made some changes to it, but these are changes that have been made in places like Australia, in places like Hawaii, in Arizona, that want to ensure that we're not putting in place a program where people that can't afford solar panels are paying for the people that can afford solar panels. So we just want to ensure there's fairness, so that seniors, so that people on low income, that students aren't paying a higher share of the bill for people that can create their own power. It's great that people can create their own power. I'm a big supporter of that. I'd love to have some solar panels on my roof. But I want to ensure that my neighbor that can't afford solar panels isn't paying a higher bill because I can. So we just want to ensure that we have a program that's fair.
Duncan.
Dr. Meili, you have 2 minutes to respond to Minister Duncan.
That simply wasn't what was happening. You actually took the program from one where people could get full credit for all the power they made, and now they can't anymore. And in the process, we put hundreds of people out of work in a growing industry. And when it comes to the Sask First stuff, well, you just know that's not the case. With less than half of the workers on that Chinook power plant were from Saskatchewan. 20% of the money stayed in the province. And you can talk about the special skills needed for power plants, but building a road around Regina, you cannot convince me that there's nobody in Saskatchewan that's able to do that. And it just frustrates me no end to hear that statement that the people of Saskatchewan can't do the work. And then there's Renew Saskatchewan. I do want to talk more about that because it's such an exciting opportunity. Say you've got your home and you want to have solar panels on the roof. You know that that will pay for itself in a few years, but who's got the upfront dollars to do it? Well, why don't we instead use the power of our crowns that we're going to keep public and actually give people a loan? And instead of having to put up that upfront dollars, you just pay the power bills you're already paying. Then over time, once that initial investment's paid off, people's bills go down to next to nothing. And we are making that transition to clean energy. People are getting lower bills, and in the process, and this is really exciting, you put thousands of people to work in every corner of the province, not one big plant here or there, but jobs everywhere. And that's what I think is missing, is the innovation, the creativity, the willingness to try new things and recognize that right now we're missing such an important opportunity when it comes to what could be done with solar, with wind, with geothermal, with conservation. We're missing the opportunity for Saskatchewan to be leading, and as a result, we're getting left behind. And you're going to see, we've already seen companies choose not to locate in Saskatchewan because we don't have the renewable energy powering our grid. Let's move down that road where we develop our economy at the same time as we develop clean energy.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Meili and Mr. Duncan, for your answer. Our next question was submitted from an audience member before the debate and continues on the themes of jobs and environment. Ali Bukhari is a student that wants to know about the party's plan for nuclear energy in the province. Minister Duncan, we will start with you. We know that you have made nuclear reactors a large part of your environmental policy. There are 3 things we would like to know. Can you update us on the timeline of your current plan, where the small modular reactors would be, and specifically, what are you doing to ensure young people are benefiting from these proposed jobs? Minister Duncan, you now have 90 seconds.
Well, I think any advancement in nuclear power obviously has to come through Saskatchewan, whether we actually see a reactor being built in Saskatchewan or not, from our uranium mines in the north to other expertise that we have, such as the Sylvia Fedoruk Center in Saskatoon. In terms of where we're at in the timelines, so about 3 weeks ago, as a part of our MOU with New Brunswick Power and Ontario Power Generation, OPG is leading the shortlist process, and 3 weeks ago they shortlisted 3 technology vendors. So they're down to 3 that they're looking at. Ontario Power Generation is on track for deployment of an SMR in the 2027 timeframe. We believe that Saskatchewan would follow after that should we pursue SMR technology, so sometime in the early 2030s. We'll likely see an SMR in North America before even 2027, though. There's several under in the development process in the United States, and the Department of Energy has recently signed off on some pretty major milestones for SMR development. So in terms of site, we would have to go through a site selection process. That process hasn't begun yet, but obviously we would have conversations with communities that might be interested in hosting an SMR. That'll be a part of the process. In terms of young people, I think there's all sorts of skill sets that will be required, I think that this is an opportunity for young people to be involved in what is a pretty exciting development.
Perfect. Thanks, Minister Duncan. Dr. Meili, if elected, would you continue with the current plan of small modular reactors? Please elaborate on your answer. You now have 90 seconds.
Thanks very much. We need to look at all of our options to reduce emissions, and we need to be open to every kind of technology. The thing that concerns me here is that what we're seeing largely from the minister and the Sask Party is a way of distracting from the current situation. We know that SMRs are likely 15, 20 years out before anything like that is ready. And we also know that there's technology available right here today. There's incredible new developments in closed-loop geothermal technology, for example, that could really lead us down the road to truly renewable baseload power. That to support solar, to support wind, to support conservation, the use of less energy. And that's where I think we're really missing the opportunity when we have the Sask Party trying to distract us and say, oh, we'll have a solution somewhere down the road in order to not have to make the wise choices and wise investments that are available to us right now. And so that's my key approach, is making sure that we look at what can we do now, and that we move as quickly down the road of going to those technologies that will reduce emissions and, as I mentioned before with Renew Saskatchewan, put thousands of people to work. Young people are looking for careers in renewable energy. Put them to work right away.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Meili. I'll now open the floor up to both participants to respond to one another, starting with Minister Duncan. You now have 2 minutes to answer.
So I would just say a couple of things. When this government formed in 2007, we had less than, I think, 200 megawatts of wind power. We're in a process right now of constructing 200 megawatts at Assiniboia and awarding 300 megawatts. That'll bring us close to 1,000 megawatts in just the last 13 years, and there likely needs to be more on that. So we're doing that. We also have 2 10 megawatt solar projects that are underway, utility scale solar. That's the cheapest way to produce solar energy, as well as allowing for residential rooftop solar. 73 kilometers that way is Torquay, Saskatchewan. It's Canada's first utility scale geothermal power plant is in development here in Saskatchewan. We are demonstrating that technology can work under this Saskatchewan Party government. So we're actually leaders in that, as we are, if you go that way, to Estevan in CCS, which the IPCC says that both CCS and nuclear power are going to be essential to get to net zero and the avoiding the 2-degree increase in temperature. SMRs is a potential possibility. I don't think on the timelines Dr. Meili's talking about, I think it's actually going to be sooner. Whether Saskatchewan actually sees a plant or not, that remains to be seen, but the technology is being developed. So we've taken an all of the above approach: wind, solar, gas, geothermal, carbon capture and sequestration, nuclear technology. We don't think that there's just one solution. We're increasing our hydro imports from Manitoba. I think there's an opportunity actually for Saskatchewan. I think we're already an energy leader in, I think, traditional and new technology. There's an opportunity for Saskatchewan to really be an energy hub for Canada and North America.
Perfect. Thanks, Minister Duncan. Dr. Meili, you now have a chance to respond to Minister Duncan. You have 2 minutes.
Well, there's one point of real agreement, and I do want to point it out, because I do think Saskatchewan is incredibly blessed with opportunity in our energy sector, and we should be investing in diverse and innovative ways. It has been disappointing to see a Sask Party government that promised a 20% reduction in emissions by 2020, and instead we've seen a significant increase in the emissions under the Sask Party. When it comes to commitment to reduce greenhouse gases, this is not a government that has taken that seriously. So we do need to be leaders, and that includes leaders in reducing emissions. That's why we've made the commitment, not as Minister Duncan has made, of up to 50% renewables by 2030. We will have 50% renewables by 2030 and 100% non-emitting electricity by 2050. And that requires us, though, to be thinking much more creatively and be much more assertive when it comes to moving down the road of renewable technology. Less than 1% of our electricity in Saskatchewan is produced by solar power. And yet, despite saying he wants to go down the road of more solar, we saw that decision to kill off the net metering program, put hundreds of people out of work, and reduce the number of people who are going down the road of producing power from the sun. This is why, and I return to our Renew Saskatchewan plan, we really need to roll out this province-wide approach of allowing everybody, farms, Indigenous communities, small towns, businesses and homeowners to be part of producing power, saving power through energy efficient retrofits as a way to reduce people's bills, keep life more affordable, make that transition to green energy, be leaders there, and put thousands of people to work in every part of the province.
Thank you for that. Well, you know what? We've now concluded our 4 policy areas that we were to cover through this debate. So thanks to all the questions that have been fielded out there and to all the young people that helped to frame that whole section. Now we're going to take some time to work with our coalition partners who've worked really hard to help put this event together. And it's awesome the amount of people that we have online that are tuning into this and responding in the chat box. So thank you for that. Keep it coming. We have questions from different groups, and each speaker will have 1 minute to answer the question. One of our first questions is from Ishita, who is representing the organization Youth Helping Youth Saskatchewan. Ishita, I pass it over to you.
Hello, Dr. Meili and Minister Duncan. My name is Ishita Mann, and I'm the founder and CEO of Youth Helping Youth Saskatchewan, an organization that strives to help youth become dependent and meaningful contributor members of society. It is my pleasure to be here with everyone today and, of course, speaking with you both. My question is, during the debate, which I thoroughly enjoyed, by the way, watching because of its civil nature, we heard very little about the indoor mask policy. I think that we can all agree that COVID-19 is an extremely important issue that concerns us all. So would both parties kindly elaborate on what restrictions and protective measures you would plan to take to decrease the spread of COVID-19 and prevent a potential second wave? And how can you ensure, and if need be, enforce that the people of Saskatchewan follow the recommended guidelines? Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Ishita. And Dr. Meili, we're going to throw it to you, and you have 1 minute to respond.
Great. Thank you very much, Ishita. The COVID-19 pandemic is a huge problem and a huge challenge for us all over the world. And here in Saskatchewan, we saw 66 new cases today. It's very concerning. One of the things that has been disappointing for me is the mixed messages that we've had from the Premier around mask use. He's refused to distance himself from the anti-mask protesters, and more concerning, has failed to give us clear guidelines of when people should be using masks. What we have right now is not clear enough about where people should be using and when would we see mandatory masks put in place. And that's what I would do, working as a family doc, work with the public health docs to make it clear exactly what we expect of people and what the threshold, rate of transmission, number of new cases, what it is that would trigger a mandatory mask bylaw or mandatory mask policy, so that it's really clear and people can plan ahead so that they know exactly when that would be expected of them. But continue to encourage that in the most evidence-based way possible.
Thank you so much. And now, Minister Duncan, you have 1 minute to respond to this.
Thanks for the question. And I would just say that, I think we've been clear that that masks are an important part of reducing transmission, particularly when you cannot social distance, when you can't keep 6 feet away. In terms of when a policy would become mandatory, we're going to rely on the advice that we've received to date from Dr. Shahab and his team. But we've also, understand that the realities of Saskatchewan. So, I represent a largely rural constituency. Weyburn the largest community, about 10,000 people live here, but the other half of my constituency is rural. So a mask policy would probably, and I use it when I go there, in the Regina Costco, makes a lot of sense to wear a mask. The Pangman Co-op grocery store and gas station or convenience store, Pangman has about 100 people. Does that require the same type of restriction or order that a mandatory mask order would follow? So I think it's really looking at the different circumstances and the situations where people really can't keep that social distance aspect.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay,
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Minister Duncan, for that. We're coming closer and closer. You guys have done so well in hanging in here, and to everybody tuning in, and great questions and the whole bit. Our final question now is coming from Zio, the Vice President of Student Affairs from the University of Regina's Students' Union. Zio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Meili and the Minister Duncan. Both you are Pride and also the two urban Saskatchewan human service agencies serving 2S LGBTQ plus people have had to cobble together 2S LGBTQ affirming counseling and mental health programs with unsustainable and inconsistent funding without support from the Ministry of Health. Our question are, what resources will you allocate to 2S LGBTQ affirming mental health and wellness initiatives, and how will you ensure these services are accessible and culturally competent for 2S LGBTQ plus communities and people? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zio, for the question. Mr. Duncan, we'll give you 1 minute to respond, please.
Sure, thanks for the question. So I'm not quite familiar with the funding levels or the services that are available through health. Certainly we want to, though, be able to provide services where people need them, when they need them. So, I would just encourage you to keep in contact with whether it's the SHA or the minister, frankly, the minister's office, and lobby for the services and the funding and the support that you need. So I'm sorry, I don't have more information or more background on the issue that you raised.
Yeah, thank you for your response, Minister Duncan. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Meili for your response. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you very much, Zio, for the question, and I see some great comments in the chat as well. It's truly important. It's still really difficult for people in Saskatchewan who are LGBTQ to access services that are appropriate, both in medical settings as well as counseling and community settings. And as we commit to funding that whole spectrum of mental health services, that whole spectrum of healthcare services, that includes dedicated supports for LGBTQ plus community. And one of the things that we have committed to, and you'll find this in our platform, is making sure that every kid, every young person who wants to be part of a GSA can have that at their school. And that's been something that we have not seen the same commitment to from this government that we would like to have. You will see from us a supportive government that understands the challenges and wants to work with the community to make sure everybody gets the help and support they need.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're now coming to the final thing around closing remarks. And then everybody that's on this, stay tuned, because there's more that comes after this. This is your call to action that comes later. So, I want to thank both of you for participating, Minister Duncan, Dr. Meili, for your engagement in this debate. To close us out, you'll each now have 90 seconds to give your closing remarks. Final chance to address, guess what, the largest voting bloc now in Saskatchewan and all the folks who came out to this debate tonight. So, Dr. Meili, you have the floor first.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Lenore and Annika and everybody for your questions. And thank you, Mr. Duncan. It's good to see you again. One of the finest debaters in the legislature, and always civil and has a good sense of humor even when we get into it. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. This is a crucial moment for our province. We have a government right now, and we have a premier right now who's satisfied, thinks that where we are is good enough. The fact is, especially for young people across Saskatchewan, folks are having a harder time. We have a government that has refused to rule out cuts at a time when we cannot be making cuts. It's a bad idea anytime. Right now, it's downright dangerous. In this election, the choice couldn't be more clear. It's a choice between a tired old Sask party, wants to talk about 2007, doesn't want to talk about today, certainly doesn't want to talk about their plans for tomorrow, or our plan to invest in people, make sure that we're getting our economy moving, getting people back to work, helping people out during this challenging time. We want to make sure that every one of us has a chance to have a great life right here, because this is our home. This is our home, and this election is our chance to make it even better. So tonight, I thank you again for your time, and I ask you for your support in these days ahead as you head to vote, and in the years ahead, as together we build that best possible future for Saskatchewan. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Meili, for your final remarks. And Minister Duncan, you now have 90 seconds to address the young people of Saskatchewan with your final remarks.
Thanks, Lenore. Thanks everybody for being here. Dr. Meili, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us this evening. I want to thank our timekeeper as well. This has been a great discussion. I always enjoy not only debating and sharing ideas with Dr. Meili, but with young people across the province. I have had the opportunity in 13 years of being elected of going to a number of classrooms and schools at universities and high schools, and even younger kids, and talking about the issues. And so I think that this is obviously an important time to talk about the future of our province, what we're trying to achieve in terms of the direction of our province. We are really focused on ensuring that we have a healthy economic climate so that we can continue to grow our jobs and employment opportunities. So frankly, that young people can stay in this province. It hasn't always been the case where Saskatchewan was a harbor for young people seeking opportunity, seeking their job opportunities, and seeking a life for themselves and for their families. And so, we've certainly seen significant growth in jobs and opportunities over the last 13 years under this government. We're not satisfied, despite what Dr. Meili says. We're not satisfied with the status quo, and we never will be. We want to ensure that we have opportunities in this province for young people to be able to live, work, and play in this province, to call Saskatchewan home, to build a life here in this province. And so thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your attention to the issues, for raising these issues with us, and for being here this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Duncan. I just want to thank everyone today for coming out to the Next Gen Leaders Debate. This is awesome. So, great, Minister Duncan, Dr. Meili, for attending, answering our questions, being so diplomatic, prioritizing youth voices during your campaigns. Really, really appreciate this. To all the attendees that are on the Zoom room with us right now, watching our live stream, and I know we're recording this as well, so we're going to be plugging this, we're going to be throwing this out there so that you can share this out amongst others all the way through to the election day of October 26th. Thank you for showing up and being a part of making sure that the key issues and concerns of the largest voting bloc in our province right now are being listened to. To keep this energy going, I'm going to throw to somebody I know pretty darn well here, Kahan, one of the election organizers with Future Majority, to talk about how we can keep the momentum going. But I also want to give a little shout out to Maeve and Tanika. Thank you so much to the two of you for doing all of the background organizing along with your other support tech crew there. Just a thumbs up, I know, from Anika and I. So thanks so much. It's been an honor to be part of this. So Kahan, over to you now.
So this is the cheesy joke where I make a reference to the fact that I'm the post-credit scene y'all been waiting for. So please just give me a few more minutes. This is the spiel. I think on a serious note, though, we have witnessed this moment, a pretty cool crossover of youth mobilization in our province. Look at this. We have student leaders, political representatives, community partners, moderators, timekeepers, volunteers, and you. You've shown, I think, tonight, but throughout this election, the power that comes when we flex our political muscle as the largest voting group. But an event like this is unfortunately, but not sadly, only the first part of our end. We're not finished yet, and the push to the end game is still happening. Because we are also assembling a team of passionate volunteers, so equally superheroes, with a mission to call thousands of other young folks across the province with a shared goal to motivate, mobilize, and let's be honest, just make sure they go out and vote. And to do that, we need your help. We need you to join us at hopefully one of our phone banking parties happening all the way up until Election Day. And if none of y'all know this, it's October 26th, so please write that down. If you're a pro volunteer, you semi-pro, you're a new volunteer, never before volunteer, it doesn't matter. We would love to have you just come, even if it's attending one session. 20 people, 30 people, 40 people, you could talk to that many folks on the phone, and you could be the reason why they're out voting instead of maybe regretting they didn't submit the ballot in. Your contribution could make this the one timeline where we all see a little positive difference. So what we're gonna do is we've shared some links in the chat. I'm gonna put a minute on the clock. We're gonna put on some, we'll call it get out the vote vibes and tunes. If y'all could be so kind and bold as we're jamming out to, click on the link. We're not asking you to like and subscribe, don't worry. We're asking you to do just a bit more. We're asking you to just sign up, to just volunteer. And again, it's not about who they vote for. It's not about why they vote. We just want young people out voting. We want every party, NDP, Sask party, any party, you name it, to be held accountable to students. Oh, okay, looks like we got some 20 folks signing up. So y'all don't want to miss out. Don't be afraid. Please sign up again. I sound like I'm a salesperson on a TV show. Maybe I'll stop with it. But thank you all, honestly. Oh, I think, we're halfway through. Looks like we had about 30 people sign up. Thank you again, everybody. And maybe I'll take this time. I want to really thank our two candidates here. Thank you for keeping this civil. I think a lot of people look at debates and they look at the American counterparts for what it could be. So we really appreciate that for keeping it crispy and Canadian. I think we've definitely hit a lot more volunteers signing up than expected. If y'all are interested in getting involved, stay in the chat. We'll be throwing more info your way. But again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And I think to conclude this off, I'm gonna pass the mic along to my very good friend, Gajinder from the U of R Student Union for his final words.
Thanks, Kehan, for your time. We all are adjusting to learning during a pandemic that could impact how everyone lives and how everything operates for generations to come. We know the pandemic has been tough, especially for students. Not only does the cost of tuition and education remains high, but the adjustment to online learning has added significant challenges for many. As seen in the past, our provincial government has a direct impact on the quality of our education, from direct financial support to supporting important programs and initiatives. More than post-secondary issues, we know there are many concerns at the heart of youth. Whether it's education, mental health, or any other issue you hold dear, we urge you all to take some time, examine both parties' platforms, and vote. In turn, we will continue doing our job as student leaders to hold our government accountable to their promises, especially ones made to our next generation of young people and students. On behalf of URSU, I thank you all for taking time today and wish our leaders you all the best. With that, I'll pass the mic back to Anika to conclude the evening.
Perfect. Thanks, Gajinder. That sounds like a great party and an impactful way to make sure we get out and vote. The election is only 1 week away, which means that now is the time to think about how and when you're going to vote. Let me see how many people are doing this in this room. Let's all put a smiley face in the chat to show you're gonna go out there and vote. So let's keep those smiley faces coming. Wow. Oh wow, great. Look at those smiley faces. Good job. Oh wow. Okay, now I feel very confident. We're all in this together. Perfect. If you have any questions about where, when, and how to vote, make sure we just dropped a link on the group chat. You click on the link and it has all the information for the 26th voting. And thank you again to all the politicians that attended, for everyone for joining us tonight, our community partners for supporting this event, and a huge shout out to all the volunteer teams that made this events happen, and things all stay safe, stay connected, and make sure we vote. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody. Good night.
We will be outroing with some soft lo-fi music featuring crispy guitar tunes. If you want to enjoy the soothing sounds of Justice there on his guitar, or look at our beautiful faces, thank you all for attending.